In the bustling city of Accra, where the sun kissed the ocean and the streets hummed with life, lived a girl named Efua. She was 17, brilliant, and full of dreams, but her parents saw only one path for her: obedience, marriage, and a life dictated by tradition. They forbade her from pursuing art, the thing she loved most. One evening, after another argument with her father about university, Efua hatched a daring plan. If she was sick, if she was beyond control, maybe they would finally let her be. She began to act strangely, speaking to herself in whispers, staring into space for long hours, laughing at nothing. Her mother, worried and ashamed, consulted elders, but Efua only grew more erratic. Finally, her father made a decision: she would be sent away for healing. They took her to the Haven, a psychiatric home on the outskirts of the city. She expected a prison, but instead, she found a world of stories. There was Kwame, the poet whose words painted invisible murals in the air; Amina, the woman who saw spirits and warned Efua that pretending to be mad was dangerous; and Baba Tunde, an old man who had been forgotten by his family but remembered every song of his youth. At first, Efua maintained her act, but the Haven was not as she imagined. It was not a place of punishment, but a place where people fought battles unseen by the world. She listened to their stories, their pain, their laughter, and soon, she could no longer tell where her pretending ended and reality began. One night, she dreamt of a shadow dancing in the moonlight. Amina's voice echoed in her ears: "Beware, child. If you dance too long in the madness, it may become your only redeem." Doubt began to creep in. Was she still pretending? Or had she become lost in the world she had created? When her parents returned weeks later, she looked into their eyes and saw fear. They had expected a daughter eager to come home, but Efua was different now. She had seen too much, learned too much. She had a choice: to leave and return to the life they dictated, or stay and face the consequences of her deception. In the end, Efua chose neither. She walked out of the Haven not as the obedient daughter nor the lost girl, but as something else, someone who had danced with shadows and found her own light. Efua walked out of the Haven with the weight of two worlds on her shoulders: the one she had left behind and the one she had entered through deception. The streets of Accra felt different now, louder, harsher. The voices of the patients she had left behind echoed in her mind: Kwame's poetry, Amina's warnings, Baba Tunde's songs. Her parents were waiting by the car, their expressions unreadable. Her mother reached for her hand hesitantly, as if afraid she might break. Her father cleared his throat. "You are coming home," he said firmly. Efua hesitated. The old Efua, the girl who had feared her father's voice more than anything, would have obeyed. But she was no longer that girl. "I want to live on my own," she said. Her mother gasped, clutching her chest. Her father's nostrils flared. "Are you still sick?" he demanded. Efua met his gaze, unafraid for the first time. "I was never sick. But if I stayed any longer, I might have been." Silence stretched between them. Then, with a voice as sharp as a knife, her father said, "If you walk away now, don't come back." Efua swallowed the lump in her throat. She had always feared this moment, the moment of complete severance. But standing at that crossroads, she realized something: the people at the Haven had lost everything long before they were locked away. But they still fought. They still dreamed. She took a deep breath. "Then I won't." With that, she turned and walked away. Efua had nowhere to go, but she had something more valuable than shelter: freedom. She found herself at an art studio in Jamestown, where young painters, sculptors, and musicians gathered to create. She offered to clean in exchange for a place to sleep, and soon, she was painting again, pouring all the pain, the fear, and the madness of her journey onto the canvas. Months passed. Her name began to spread through the city's art circles. People saw the rawness in her walk, the echoes of the forgotten voices she had carried from the haven. And then, one day, she received an invitation, an exhibition in her name. The night of the exhibition, Efua stood before her paintings, surrounded by strangers who saw her soul in color and texture. But in the crowd, she spotted two familiar faces, her parents. Her mother's eyes were filled with tears. Her father, rigid as ever, stood beside her. They said nothing, but they did not turn away. It was not an apology. It was not reconciliation. But it was something. Efua nodded to them, then turned back to her art. She had stepped into the shadows, danced with them, and come out with her own light. And now, she would never let it dim again. Efua's art exhibition was a success. People spoke about her work with her, calling it hauntingly beautiful, and a glimpse into the unseen. Her pieces reflected her journey, the tangled lines of deception, the faces of those she had met at the haven, and the war between control and freedom. Despite their silence, Efua knew her parents' presence that night meant something. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of her path, though they still did not understand it. But understanding was not her goal. Acceptance, even in the smallest form, was enough. With the money she made from the exhibition, Efua rented a small apartment. It was nothing grand, just a single room with a bed, a small table, and enough space for her easel. But it was hers. No more hiding, no more pretending. She visited the haven once a month, bringing painting supplies for the patients. Kwame wrote poetry on the walls now, his words a testament to the world inside his mind. Amina, who once warned her about the dangers of pretending, simply smiled when she saw Efua. "You walked close to the edge," Amina said one day, watching Efua sketch under a mango tree. "But you didn't fall." "No," Efua agreed. "But I learned that the edge is where the best stories are." One afternoon, Efua received an unexpected message. Her younger brother, Kojo, wanted to see her. They met in a small cafe, away from their parents' watchful eyes. "I don't understand you," Kojo admitted, stirring his tea. "I don't understand why you left, why you embarrassed our family." Efua looked at him, the brother who once idolized her, now seeing her as a stranger. "Do you think I wanted to embarrass them?" she asked. "I just wanted to leave." Kojo sighed. "Father won't talk about you. Mother prays for you every day. They say you're lost." She smiled softly. "I was lost. But then I found myself." Kojo studied her, his young face conflicted. I think I envy you." Efua reached across the table, placing a hand over his. "You don't have to envy me. You just have to choose your own path." For the first time, she saw something shift in Kojo's eyes. A spark. A possibility. Years later, Efua's name would be known beyond Accra. Her paintings would hang in galleries across Africa and beyond, carrying the voices of the forgotten, the misunderstood, and the dreamers. Her father never fully forgave her, but her mother would visit sometimes, bringing food and silent pride. Kojo, now older, would break away from the life their parents had planned for him, carving his own future. And as for Efua, she never forgot the haven, the people who had shown her what it meant to truly see the world. She had danced with shadows, but she had not let them consume her. Instead, she had turned them into light. Years passed and Efua's journey took her beyond the borders of Ghana. She traveled across Africa, painting the forgotten stories of those society cast aside. From the crowded streets of Lagos to the quiet villages of Ethiopia, she met people whose pain and dreams mirrored her own. Her exhibitions became more than just art shows, they were conversations about mental health, freedom, and the burden of tradition. Journalists wrote about her work, calling her the artist who painted the unseen. She was invited to speak at conferences, but she always carried the same message. We must listen to the people we ignore. Sometimes, the ones we call mad are simply those who refuse to be caged. One rainy afternoon, years after she had first left, Efua returned to the haven, not as a patient, but as a guest. The home had changed. New faces filled the halls, but some familiar ones remained. Kwame, the poet, was leading a writing workshop. Amina, still sharp-eyed and wise, sat under the mango tree where they once spoke. She grinned when she saw Efua. "I knew you would come back," Amina said. Efua sat beside her. "I had to." They spoke for hours about the people who had come and gone, about the world outside. When Efua shared her plan to fund an art program for the patients, Amina simply nodded. "Good," she said. "Let them paint their way out of their shadows." Not long after her return, Efua received news that her father was ill. For years, she had stayed away, uncertain if she could ever face him again. But when Kojo called, his voice laced with urgency, she knew she had to go. When she entered their home, her mother's eyes welled with tears. Kojo led her to their father's bedside. He looked smaller, weaker. The once unshakable man who had tried to control her was now at the mercy of time. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with a voice rough from age and regret, her father muttered, "You never listened." Efua exhaled slowly. "Neither did you." Silence. Then, his gaze softened just a little. "You paint." She nodded. "Yes." A pause. Then, almost too quiet to hear, he said, "Show me." The next day, she brought a painting, a piece that depicted her journey. The shadows of the haven, the colors of freedom, and the light she had fought for. Her father stared at it for a long time, and though he said nothing, a single tear slid down his cheek. He never apologized. He never said he was proud. But he asked her to leave the painting in his room. And for Efua, that was enough. Years later, after her father passed, Efua's work would inspire young artists across Africa. The arts program at the Haven flourished, giving patients a voice through color and canvas. Kojo became her closest supporter, breaking free from the path their father had set for him. And though Efua never returned home permanently, she visited often, not as the lost daughter, but as the woman who had built her own path. She had danced with shadows, but she had become something more, proof that even in darkness, there is always a way to find the light. Efua's art was no longer just a personal rebellion, it had become a movement. She established the Haven Art Initiative, a program that brought art therapy to psychiatric homes, orphanages, and rehabilitation centers. What started as a small project at the Haven grew into something bigger than she had imagined. Young artists who had once been forgotten, those society had dismissed as mad or troubled, now had a platform to express themselves. Their paintings told stories of pain, hope, and survival. Some even went on to exhibit their work alongside Efua's, proving that healing could come through creation. But despite her success, a part of her still longed for true reconciliation with her father. Months before her father passed, Efua visited him more often. He never spoke much, but she noticed the way he would watch her. It was not the gaze of a man disappointed in his child, it was something quieter, almost contemplative. One evening, as she prepared to leave, her mother stopped her at the door. "He kept something for you," she said, pressing an old notebook into Efua's hands. Confused, Efua opened it. Inside were pages filled with sketches, rough, uncertain drawings of landscapes, faces, and, most surprisingly, a young girl holding a paintbrush. Efua's breath caught. "He drew," she whispered. Her mother nodded. "When he was younger. But his father never let him pursue it. He burned most of his sketches, said it was a waste of time." Efua ran her fingers over the drawings, feeling the weight of an untold story. Efua did not just change her own fate, she changed the fate of those who came after her. Kojo, inspired by his sister's defiance, pursued architecture instead of law, something their father had once forbidden. And when he built his first project, a community arts center in Accra, he named it the Efua Center for Creativity. Young girls who once thought their only path was obedience now had role models like Efua to look up to. Parents who once believed in strict, traditional ways began to reconsider, asking themselves if control was truly the way to raise a child. Efua had broken the cycle. She had walked a tightrope between sanity and deception, between tradition and rebellion. And in the end, she had not just survived, she had thrived. She had danced with shadows. And in doing so, she had become the light. Efua's journey did not just change her, she had also left an undeniable mark on the lives of those she had encountered. Some remained in her life, while others faded into the background, but each had shaped her in ways she had not expected. Amina had always been the one who saw beyond the surface. At the Haven, she had warned Efua about pretending for too long, about dancing too close to the shadows. But there was something deeper in Amina's words, something Efua had never fully understood, until she returned to the Haven years later. Amina was older now, but her spirit remained fierce. "I told you the shadows would try to claim you," she said, smiling as she traced a finger across a canvas Efua had brought for the patients. "But I found my way out," Efua replied. Amina tilted her head, eyes sharp. "Did you? Or did you learn to carry them with you?" Efua paused. She had spent years thinking she had left her past behind, but in truth the weight of it still lingered. She painted her pain, turned it into something beautiful, but it never truly left her. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. Amina nodded knowingly. "We don't escape our shadows, child. We learn to make peace with them." That night, Efua painted something different, something raw. It was not a piece for an exhibition, not something to be admired by strangers. It was for her, a self-portrait, but not the confident artist the world knew. It was her at 17, the girl who had faked madness, the girl who had been afraid but determined. She painted her own shadows, not as enemies, but as old companions who had shaped her journey. Kwame, the poet, had once been one of Efua's closest friends at the Haven. He had a gift with words, but his mind was fragile, caught in a cycle of brilliance and breakdowns. When Efua returned, she found that Kwame had left the Haven and was now performing spoken word poetry in small clubs across Accra. His words were still sharp, but now they carried a strength they hadn't before. One evening, Efua sat in the audience as Kwame took the stage. He looked at her and smiled before beginning his poem. "They called us lost, called us mad. Whispered our names like curses in the wind. But we are not ghosts. We are the ones who remember the songs forgotten. Who turn sorrow into stories. Who dance with the darkness and still find the light." When he stepped off the stage, Efua hugged him. "You made it out," she whispered. Kwame chuckled. "We both did." Kojo had always been the obedient son, the one who tried to live up to their father's expectations. But watching Efua build her life outside their father's control had planted a seed in him, one that grew slowly but surely. After their father's death, Kojo had a choice: to follow the path laid out for him, or to build his own. Inspired by Efua, he left his stable but unfulfilling job and pursued his passion for architecture. When he designed the Efua Center for Creativity, he called her to the site before it was completed. "You changed everything," he told her, standing in the half-built structure. Efua looked at the walls rising around them, at the space that would soon be filled with young artists, dreamers, and rebels like herself. She turned to Kojo, eyes shining. "No," she said. "We did. Years later, Efua stood in front of a crowd at the grand opening of the center named after her. She spoke not just about art, but about freedom, about mental health, about the courage to be different in a world that demanded conformity. She spoke about the people who had shaped her, Amina, Kwame, Kojo, and even her father. And when she finished, she looked out at the crowd and saw something she had never expected, her mother, standing in the back, tears in her eyes. Efua walked over and took her mother's hand. "I never wanted to shame the family," Efua said softly. Her mother squeezed her hand. "I know that now." For the first time, there were no expectations, no demands. Just two women who had survived a storm, finally standing side by side. Efua had danced with shadows, but now she stood in the light. And this time, she was not alone. Efua's journey was not just about art or rebellion, it was about healing. And healing, she learned, was not a straight road. It curved, dipped, and sometimes doubled back. Though she had gained freedom, built a life, and found purpose, there were still pieces of her past that haunted her. One evening, Efua returned to the haven to visit Amina. The woman who had once seemed unshakable was now frail. Time had begun to wear her down, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "You've come back," Amina said as Efua sat beside her. "I always come back," Efua replied. Amina chuckled. "Because part of you still belongs here." Efua hesitated. "Maybe." Silence stretched between them before Amina finally spoke again. "I like to stay here, you know. Just like you did." Efua blinked in surprise. "What?" Amina smiled bitterly. "I was never sick. Not the way they thought. I just needed a place to escape, a place where the world outside couldn't reach me. So, I let them believe I was mad. And in return, I got a roof, food, and time to think." Efua felt her heart tighten. She had thought she was the only one who had ever faked illness to escape the outside world. But Amina had done the same, for survival. "Did you ever regret it?" Efua asked. Amina sighed. "At first. But then I realized something. This place saved me, just like it saved you." Efua thought about that. Maybe the haven had been a prison at first, but it had also been where she found herself. Without it, she might have never met the people who changed her life. Amina reached for Efua's hand. "You got out, Efua. That means I did too." And for the first time, Efua saw Amina not just as a guide, but as a woman who had been trapped in her own way. Kwame's poetry grew bolder as the years passed. One day, Efua received a message from him, an invitation to his first published book launch. The title, Love Letters to Madness. At the event, Kwame read one of his pieces aloud. "They feared the way we saw the world. Feared the way we spoke to ghosts and dreams. They locked us away, hoping we would forget. But the truth is, madness is just another way to see clearly." Efua wiped a tear as she watched him sign books, each copy carrying the voice of a man who had once been locked in silence. Later that night, Kwame found her outside, staring at the city skyline. "Did you ever love the madness?" he asked. Efua exhaled. "I feared it first. Then I embraced it. Now, I think I just respect it." Kwame grinned. "That's all we can do." Kojo's architectural career flourished, but the weight of their father's expectations had left deeper scars than he admitted. One evening, he called Efua to meet him at the nearly finished Efua Center for Creativity. When she arrived, he looked exhausted, his usual confidence shaking. "I keep hearing his voice," Kojo admitted. "Even when I know I'm doing the right thing. I keep waiting for him to walk in and tell me I've wasted my life." Efua put a hand on his shoulder. "He's gone, Kojo. His words don't control you anymore." Kojo swallowed hard. "Then why does it feel like they still do?" Efua understood. Just because their father was gone didn't mean his presence had vanished. The echoes of his disappointment lingered, whispering doubts. You're not alone in this, she told him. We both have ghosts. But we don't have to live for them. Kojo nodded slowly, as if trying to believe it. And Efua knew that healing, for him, would take time. But at least now, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. One day, Efua's mother finally visited her home. She walked through the small but warm space, running her fingers along the paintings on the walls. She stopped at one, a portrait of a young Efua, sitting in the shadows, her face half lit. Efua stood beside her, waiting. I used to think you were lost, her mother finally said. That I had failed you. Efua glanced at her. And now? Her mother took a deep breath. Now I see that you found a path I was too afraid to take. It wasn't a perfect apology. But it was an acknowledgement. And that was more than Efua had ever hoped for. Years later, at the opening of the Efua Center, she stood on stage, looking at the crowd of young artists, musicians, and dreamers. People who had been told they were too different, too strange, too rebellious. She smiled. This is for the ones who danced with shadows, she said. And found their way home. And as she spoke, she saw them in the crowd, Amina, now frail but smiling. Kwame, holding a copy of his book. Kojo, standing tall, and her mother, watching with pride. She had danced with shadows. And in the end, she had taught them how to dance too. Though Efua had built a new life, the ghosts of her past never truly disappeared. They whispered in the quiet moments, in the silence between brushstrokes, in the spaces between dreams and waking. But now, she listened to them differently. She no longer feared the shadows. She had made peace with them. A year after the Efua Center for Creativity opened, Efua received a call from the Haven. Amina had passed away in her sleep. Efua sat in silence for a long time after hearing the news. She had always known Amina's time was limited, but she had imagined they had more of it. More conversations under the mango tree. More riddles. More wisdom. She returned to the Haven for the funeral. It was a simple gathering. Amina had no family that they knew of. But the people she had guided, the ones she had spoken life into, came to say their goodbyes. Efua stood before the small gathering, hands trembling as she unfolded a piece of paper. She told me once that we don't escape our shadows, Efua said. We make peace with them. She exhaled, blinking back tears. Amina was never afraid of the dark. She walked through it with her head held high. And because of her, so many of us found the courage to do the same. She placed a single paintbrush on Amina's grave, a symbol of the stories left unfinished, the wisdom still lingering in the air. That night, Efua sat beneath the mango tree one last time, staring at the stars. She imagined Amina laughing, somewhere beyond, whispering riddles to the universe. And in the wind, she almost heard the words, keep dancing. Kwame's poetry had taken him far. His words now reached beyond the clubs of Accra. He was invited to perform in South Africa, Nigeria, even Paris. But with success came pressure. One evening, he called Efua. She could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I don't know who I'm writing for anymore, he admitted. Efua frowned. What do you mean? Kwame sighed. Before, my words were my escape. Now they feel like a performance. Like I have to be the poet who survived the Haven, instead of just me. Efua understood. Success had a way of trapping people in the very thing that once freed them. What if you write just for yourself again? She suggested. Kwame chuckled. You say that like it's easy. It's not, Efua admitted. But neither was getting here. And you did that. There was a pause. Then Kwame said, you ever think we're still trapped in different ways? Efua thought about that. About the weight of expectation, the ghosts of the past, the need to prove herself over and over again. Yes, she finally said. But at least now, we know the way out. Despite his success in architecture, Kojo still wrestled with the past. One day, he did something that surprised even himself. He returned to their father's old study. It had been untouched since their father's death. The bookshelves still smelled of old paper, the heavy desk still carried the weight of decisions made decades before. Kojo sat in the chair where their father once ruled over their lives. And then, he did something his father never would have allowed. He opened the drawer, pulled out a blank page, and began to sketch. Not blueprints, not something practical, just art. For the first time, he allowed himself to create for the sake of creation. No rules, no restrictions, just the pure joy of drawing. When Efua visited, he showed her the sketch. It's beautiful, she said. Kojo exhaled. I think I'm finally letting go. Efua squeezed his hand. Our father never got the chance to do this. But you do. Kojo nodded, and for the first time, he felt it, the weight lifting. Years passed and Efua's name became known beyond Ghana. She was invited to speak about art and mental health across the continent. She worked with young artists, mentored those who had been cast aside. But one day, she felt an old longing stare. She had spent so long telling others' stories. Perhaps it was time to tell her own. And so, she began painting again. Not for exhibitions, not for galleries, just for herself. The first painting she completed was a self-portrait, one last version of the girl who had once danced with shadows. This time, she stood in the light, her face calm, her eyes steady. She had survived, she had lived, and now, she was free. At the end of her journey, Efua realized something. Healing was not about errors in the past. It was about carrying it differently. She had danced with shadows. But in the end, she had not been consumed by them. She had learned to make them part of the story.